So I was sent a review key for the game Dark Quest 3, and I thought, yeah, sure, it'll be a quick 100% and then I'll get that guide out. Well, I very much underestimated the amount of time and effort it would take to actually beat the final area, Chaos Castle, and the final boss. So today we're going to go over the best team comp that I could find and my strategy and thoughts as I went through each area. And now, let's get to hunting. Now, what I found to be one of the best team comps is the Knight, Barbarian, Fire Mage, and Lady. To break down the thought process behind this and our goals while building up this team, we'll fast forward to what they look like going into Chaos Castle. For the Fire Mage, we're going to upgrade Fireball, Burning Hands, and his attack. Try to grab any magic damage increase items to put on him as you go through. And moving on to the Knight, we'll want to get Protection upgraded early on and Follow Me upgraded after. I wouldn't really worry about putting items on him, and we're not going to upgrade his attack until after both the Fire Mage and Barbarian have had their attacks maxed. For the Barbarian, we'll prioritize getting Throw Axe maxed and his attack maxed first, and Double Attack maxed after. Item-wise, you're going to want to give him any equipment that adds to attack cards with body damage. And for fun, you could also give him the Lightning Orb if you go through the Dragon area, as that's going to trigger for both attacks on a double attack. Huge potential for big damage. Then for the Lady, we don't really care about upgrading her attacks, but we will want to upgrade Sacrifice immediately. Then Divine Shield and Attract we're going to want to get mid to late game. As for the equipment, we want to give her any steel boots to add armor on movement, adding armor in general, and especially green amulets. We want her to be moving beside enemies, gaining armor, and then tanking damage and healing the party with Sacrifice. I'll show the runes I got while going through my run so you have an idea on those as well. They aren't really required, but these are some of the best ones to get for this team comp. Having one enemy attack another prior to the battle can be huge late game especially. Doubling the healing from combat cards is also huge. Having a hero gain an extra action at the start of combat is kind of required, to be honest. And the +5 to each armor on all heroes makes them all much tankier. For combat cards, you basically want to stock up on healing potions and potions of heroism. I got super unlucky and didn't really get to buy any potions of heroism, but this team comp is so good that I still had no trouble getting through Chaos Castle. Our main strategy going through each fight will be to use secondary actions of all of the characters first before ending the first turn. The Knight will protect the Lady to add armor to her. The Lady will put Divine Shield on a character that is most in danger of being hit other than herself. And the Barbarian and Fire Mage will use secondary attacks to clean up extra enemies that may pose a threat to our goal of using the enemy's attacks on the Lady to farm health for the rest of the group. Then to use an actual action, we're generally going to start it off by moving the Lady to a position where enemies will attack her. But occasionally, she'll already be in that position, and it's better to use an attack to finish another more dangerous enemy off. Then continue to pay attention to the enemy turn order and the enemy abilities to make sure that none of the characters other than the Lady will take hits and get it down to 1 or 2 enemies left. Then you can go into farming mode, and you can just use the move and stand card for the Lady to give her more armor each turn and let her tank hits while healing the party. This is the gameplay loop that we'll be using pretty much up until Chaos Castle. Alright, now getting into the first area of the run. The first 2 abilities we want to work on and honestly max are going to be Sacrifice for the Lady and Protect for the Knight. Upgrade the Barbarian and Fire Mage's attacks first before putting points in either of the other 2's attacks. Anytime you have a choice between taking an equipment card and a combat card, you basically always want to choose equipment. These are going to snowball your run along with your abilities much more than the combat cards can. When you get a choice to fight weaker enemies, you want to take it, and for the most part, anytime you get to upgrade something from a fight, you're going to want to take those as well. In fights early on, you're not going to have as much damage to throw around, but we do have the Lady there to tank most of the damage for us. Just pay attention to the attack patterns of enemies and check their targeting card if you need to, so you can plan a few turns ahead. You want to keep anyone from being damaged more than their armor, but try to leave at least one enemy to keep alive each combat to farm a little bit of health. Once Sacrifice is maxed out for the Lady and we have a point or 2 in Protect with the Knight, we're going to want to start at least getting 1 point in Throw Axe for the Barbarian and Fireball and Flaming Hands with the Fire Mage. Since these are all secondary actions, they can essentially do all of them for free before we have to use a real action and give the enemy a turn. Plus, the attacks all scale their damage with the equipment we'll be giving them. For the second area, we'll try to go to the Mushroom Kingdom. That has a lot of smaller enemies that we can use to farm more health for everyone, and plenty of free upgrades from the encounter cards. If you have a character wander off, you'll want that to be the Barbarian generally so that he can throwing axe kill one enemy and then attack the other. You'll generally get through it for free and get an attack upgrade that way. On the large ambushes on this map, you'll be fine taking those on once the first enemy attacks. Just pay attention to the positioning and use your free secondary action attacks from the Fire Mage and the Barbarian to clean up any other enemies that wouldn't be going for the lady and farm as much health off the encounters as you can. Then I'm going to choose the Goblin Caves next, as it's another great one to farm healing off of. There are a lot of smaller enemies and the encounters aren't that tough, so just keep employing the strategy and get through these fights. For any of the encounters that result in a party member disappearing for a turn or two, I honestly didn't care that much. Generally, it won't result in anything too bad happening, but definitely avoid any large amounts of damage, hero deaths, or having them disappear for some amount of turns like 4 or more. Honestly, even 3 is kind of pushing it, but 2 you can get away with. I'll have an example fight playing here where you can see kind of how these early fights grinding health should generally go. Now moving on from there, you may think that the Tower of Mirrors would be easier than the Labyrinth, but I actually find the Labyrinth easier with this build, especially if you've already put a point or 2 in Divine Shield for the lady. For the encounters where you'll end up fighting either 2 or 3 enemies, I'd recommend trying not to take on the 3 enemies unless you're very confident with the amount of damage and upgrades you have on your team. 2 enemies here you can easily manage, but 3 will take a little bit more thought as these enemies are going to be bigger and tougher. I'll show an example here of one of these 4 enemy fights in this area to show the general strategy in action here, as well as how to effectively take care of it without taking much, if any, real damage. Then moving on to the next area, we'll go to the city. It's not too tough, especially with this build, and you can get a lot of money as long as you have a few dice stocked up. Again, you'll want to be taking most fights to farm health and upgrades to get as much health as possible onto your party. By this point, you should have the machine running, and with a little bit of thought throughout the fights, you can get through them without taking damage, or just a little bit in the tougher fights, like the boss fight. Next up, I went to Dragon Valley. It's not necessarily the easiest, but it really isn't too hard either. The big dragon fight to transform a hero into a dragon you probably won't want to do on this run, so I would skip that fight. The dragon cultists aren't too hard, so definitely take those fights and get some easy upgrades there. If you have the key to the dragon vault, you'll want to probably choose the magic amulet to greatly boost the damage the fire mage does. Ideally, you won't have any heroes dying, so the amulet of immortality would be kind of a dead card for you anyway. And as long as you've gotten a good amount of health farmed, I would highly recommend taking on the Lightning Dragon to get that piece of equipment and do electric attacks after you use your weapon. That'll be a crazy amount of damage that you can add to the Barbarian. While going through these last areas, you're going to want to take a point in a couple of less important abilities like Kick, Counterattack, and Attract, as there's going to be a point coming up in Chaos Castle where you lose an ability, and you'll want to be able to choose one that isn't one of our main abilities. Now when it's finally time to move on to the Chaos Castle, you'll take your last upgrade for the game, and ideally you'll have your lady alive with 30 or 40 health, and the rest of your party will be around 100. If you're anywhere close to that, you're going to breeze through this area. The first fight will be at the entrance of the castle. You don't want the Trident guys to get a turn especially, but honestly you can probably get through this fight without any of them getting a turn. When given the choice to sacrifice, don't sacrifice your heroes if you had an okay run. You'll only want to do that if you're just barely alive and there's no way that you can beat the rest of the fights. The bridge will be a slightly harder fight, but you do have some predictable enemy attacks here to make it easier to plan out. Remember to use your bonus actions before ending your turn to mitigate the damage the enemies may be able to do. As you can see here, I managed to get through this fight while only taking a very small amount of damage. Then we have a mirror fight, which you'll mainly want to take out the Barbarian and Fire Mage first and make sure they don't get any turns. They both do a lot of damage, and we purposefully leave the other two as more support characters for this very reason. If you can leave the lady and possibly the knight alive to farm more health with your lady, then go ahead and do that as well. It may not be that necessary at this point, but I'd take any advantage that I can get. Going up to the summoning portal, we have another big fight, but it shouldn't be that tough. You'll of course start out by looking at the enemy's abilities and how they target. I fireball here to finish off one enemy and damage 3 others. Then I protect the lady, give the barbarian the divine shield, and move her up here. The enemy that attacks next attacks the closest enemy, so he'll just hit the lady and heal one of our other heroes while also damaging one of the enemies and even killing it. Thinking about positioning and turn order like this is one of the big advantages that will get you through this game. Then I send the barbarian to throw an axe and finish off the other staff enemy, as we don't want them controlling our people on their turn. We use the mage to finish off another enemy with an extra attack and let the other hit the barbarian so it negates all damage with the divine shield. We have him go down to finish off the other one and end the round. Now that everyone has their moves again, we can just have one of them finish off the last enemy, and then we can get through it without taking any real damage. That is the power of this build. So we go through Chaos Lightning, one of our heroes attacks the others, and then we can finally fight the horseman. You honestly deal enough damage with secondaries and you can negate all of the damage from the melee one, so you can just do that, finish the magic one off, and then easily finish the other one. At this point, you're basically good to go, as we only have the wizard left and he's really not that hard compared to the rest of the Chaos Castle fights. So going into it, he has 99 health, but we have a crazy amount of damage that we'll do before turn 1, and we can use protection on the red mage and divine shield on the barbarian. These are the two that we have to keep alive and keep the damage coming, so that's how we're going to prioritize that. Of course, with the knight's command, we can even get the barbarian to take an extra free attack, so use that to your advantage as well. And finally, after a few more hits, you'll have the wizard defeated. And now, if you enjoyed my breakdown of this build and strategy guide for Dark Quest 3 to help you get all of the achievements, consider becoming a channel member on YouTube or joining the Patreon. Links are both in the description. You also may be interested in my Loop Hero playlist, as it's another indie turn-based roguelike that I covered all of the achievements for previously.